He's in our virtual green room. Wait till you hear his story. You guys are going to love it. John Troxell. He became the senior enlisted advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And what does that mean? You know, he was in the Army for 38 years, and that was the culmination, the pinnacle of what he did. He was incredible in these 5 combat tours, what he went through, what he saw, and how he rose to the senior most enlisted person in the entire U.S. Armed Forces. So, John, thanks so much for joining us here on America Tonight with me, Kate Delaney.
Kate, it's truly an honor to be here, and thank you for allowing me to be on your show.
So let's talk about, first of all, what made you decide you were going to write the book? Because you have so many stories to tell.
So normally enlisted people retire after about 20 years, at the very most 30 years. But I had the honor and opportunity to serve for 38, and I reached the pinnacle of the enlisted ranks in the entire U.S. Armed Forces. So I was working in the Pentagon and was reporting directly to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Secretary of Defense. But throughout my career, I've always tried to be, a leader of example, try to be a team player and everything. And along the way, humbly gained a good reputation. And then when I got in the Pentagon, looking out for 3 million active Guard and Reserve service members and everything, and then coordinating with 2 different presidential administrations, 1 year with the Obama and 3 years with the Trump administration, and working for people like Jim Mattis and Joe Dunford and folks like that. And then being the guy that has always tried to be a motivator, but more importantly, try to send messages that provide inspiration, purpose, and direction, and intimidation to our enemies, which is, why I told terrorists, that they had 2 options, surrender or die, which is the title of the book. But once I retired, people wanted to know more about me, the person. I've been married for 40 years. And my wife has made this journey with me the whole way. So people kept telling me to write a book. And I really didn't know how to get after it until I met my author coach, a lady named Ann McIndoe, who kind of walked me through the process. And I knocked it out. And here we are. I am a published author now of my memoir. And now, I get opportunities like this with very influential people like you. But more importantly, it just does me proud when I hear people that read my book and they say things like, it felt like I was standing next to you through your whole life's journey because of the way the book was written, or that they could identify with certain things, especially if they were military, because they had served in combat, or because they were a family member who had a loved one that served in combat. So the reason for the book was to provide inspiration, again, to folks that would read it, and hopefully they could take some nuggets from the book and continue on with their life's journey or their military journey to continue to achieve success.
And, it's so interesting, John, because the nuggets that you give us in the book are definitely inspirational, but I like that you tell the stories. And you said it right at the top. And when I asked you, why did you write the book? 38 years at the senior enlisted advisor level, which is incredible. Think of the rooms that you were in, being that advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You said it through the administrations, the things that you saw, 5 combat tours. I mean, the combat tours that you were on, including from the beginning, the parachute assault in Panama, Just Cause, Operation Desert Shield, Storm, Iraq, all the tours that you did. Give us a story from those tours, something that you talk about in the book.
So so for those that follow me, I have a page called eTool Nation, and we can get into the whole thing later, how this eTool Nation evolved. But I talked today about the current events that are going on in Israel in terms of, what the Israelis are up against when they're fighting radical jihadist terrorist organizations. And those of us that have served in combat know the brutality and the savagery that these terrorist organizations. And so I posted about a story in Iraq, and I try to give context without being too graphic of what these organizations are about and why they're so radical. And I talked about a tour my tour in Iraq during the surge in 2007 and 8. This was when there was a civil war going on between the Shia and Sunni sects of the Iraqi population, with a lot of influence from Iran on the Shia people, and then certainly the Iraqi government on the Sunnis and everything. But it was a very dangerous time. And because we, the U.S. and coalition forces, were having such an impact on the terrorists and allowing space and time for the Iraqi government, Iraqi security forces to kind of get their footing and provide for the security of Iraqi citizens, the enemy knew they couldn't have as much impact against us, so they started attacking innocent civilians. And I talk about all the time the shallow graves of murdered Iraqi citizens we had found, to include Iraqi children bound, with their hands bound behind their back and beheaded, you know. And so I say that and I talk about that because that had a significant impact on me and every soldier that served with me throughout our combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, because the enemy we were facing did not have a respect for human life, and certainly not the law of armed conflict. And so those kinds of things had a profound impact on me, that not only did we need to defeat this enemy, but the center of gravity for any combat operation is the innocent citizens. And from the moment I saw things like that, my message to my troops was, we've got to take care of the citizens as we neutralize the enemy. And then, so that led to a story that of a humanitarian side in the book, and it's about a young girl named Shahad Abbas. She was a 10-year-old Iraqi girl, and her and her little brother, Aziz Abbas, who was 7 years old, were walking to school. And anybody that knew during that time in Iraq, you know, there's trash everywhere in the streets, and the enemy would hide bombs within this trash and everything, with the hopes that U.S. forces would detonate these bombs and inflict pain on and suffering on ourselves, and certainly death. Well, anyways, the kids were walking to school, and little Aziz stepped on one of these improvised explosive devices, and it detonated. It killed him immediately, and Shahad became a bilateral amputee. And so I went out on patrol with the platoon that had kind of adopted Shahad and her family, trying to look out for them now that they had lost a son, and now they had a daughter that was a bilateral amputee. And when I went out there that night on that patrol in one of the most dangerous areas of Diyala province in Iraq, in the city of Bakuba, and I had my chaplain with me, and we went out there that night just to check on the family. And when we got there, and I saw this little 10-year-old girl in an adult-sized wheelchair, her other siblings and friends in the neighborhood were running around and playing. And, you know, it was just, I mean, it really had an impact. And as we were talking there with the family, the one wish that this little girl had was that one day she could walk to school again. She did not want to be deterred because she had lost her legs, but she wanted to be able to walk to school like she did before. And so the chaplain decides, hey, let's do a prayer, Sergeant Major, for, you know, that you know, she will get her legs. And I was a little skeptical at first, because I did not want to try to do a Christian prayer in the backyard of a Muslim family who, you know, does not practice Christianity. And so I pushed back to the chaplain. I said, look, we are not going to impose our values or who we are on this Muslim family. And he kept assuring me, hey, it'll be all right. It'll be all right. So I finally relented, and we all, in all of our combat gear with our weapons, machine guns and everything, we all took a knee around this little girl's wheelchair, and we grabbed hold of it. And the chaplain said a prayer. And as he began this prayer, I was still a little skeptical, and I looked up at the Abbas family, and all of them, mom, dad, aunts, uncles, all of them were praying in their traditional Muslim method. And I thought to myself at that point in time, for this 1 minute of this prayer, the world is perfect. Christians aren't killing Muslims. Muslims aren't killing Christians. We are coming together as one and praying to God or Allah that they will show a miracle and give this little girl her legs and allow her to walk to school. And so I was so excited after that, Kate, and I grabbed my chaplain by the short hairs and I told him, we're going to support this platoon, and we're going to do what we can to get this little girl her legs. So months went by, and we were about 3 weeks from redeploying after a hard 15-month tour where we had lost 54 of our troops and over 500 were severely wounded. And the chaplain walked into my office there at Forward Operating Base Warhorse in Bakuba, and he had a big old grin on his face. And he showed me this video. The platoon had coordinated and gotten Shahad down to Baghdad to the hospital there, and she had been given prosthetics. And the video that the chaplain showed me was Shahad Abbas with the use of crutches walking to school, surrounded by a squad of U.S. soldiers escorting her there. And to this moment, Kate, the hair still gets up on the back of my neck and my arms, because it was such a profound moment that people don't realize that the men and women of the U.S. military, yes, we are charged with defending our freedom, our homeland, and way of life, but we are humanitarians as well. And as much as we go into combat to neutralize the enemy, we look to take care of the population of the host nation that we're in. And this was probably the most profound moment in 5 combat tours I had, seeing this little girl walk to school. And it was all done by the good graces of young American men and women in uniform.
More with John Troxell coming up around the bend. More with John Troxell, who's written the book Surrender or Die, Reflections of a Combat Leader. Pick it up on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. Wow, what a story. Take us there, John.
I knew this insidious enemy, this suffocating weather, and this brutal terrain, that the men and women in my formation had to be hard, and they had to be at peak operating capability. So that's where I developed this program that got after functional fitness, but also included the ability to get after mental and emotional wellness to be best prepared for our combat. And so phrase in about 2007 and 8, and it became a big part of who I was and what I am and what I tried to influence onto the men and women in my charge. And then when I got to the Pentagon as the SEAC, Secretary Mattis was the Secretary of Defense, and as the SEAC, you advised the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense. And when Mattis came in, he started saying things like, we're not just going to defeat the enemies of the United States, we are going to annihilate them. And he kept telling me, get the word out to the force that if anybody, whether it's a state or a non-state actor, is going to try to impinge on the freedoms of the United States or our partners and allies, that we're not just going to neutralize them, we are going to annihilate them, so they never think again about impinging on innocent people and freedom-loving people. Been going to places all around the world visiting our troops, garden spots like Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, Libya, Yemen, South Korea, Colombia, all the places that there was a lot of contention or downright combat going on. And then when I had gone to the White House to do some meetings with members of the administration's deputy subcommittee groups, I had a conversation with one young staffer who said, the way to get after these terrorists is to give them a job. And I thought, well, she has no idea what she's talking about. The vast majority of terrorists in the world aren't driven by poverty. Now, don't get me wrong, in poorest countries like Somalia, yes, they might be driven by that poverty. But the vast majority of them come from influential families, and they are driven by the radical ideology. And so, based off of what Mattis's message was and what General Dunford, the chairman, was trying to get after in terms of building joint readiness and everything like that, I knew I needed to have an influential message to the troops. And so one day I just, out visiting the troops, and I was with Mattis at the time, I said, here's the bottom line. And I got this when I was in Syria visiting our troops during the lasting defeat of ISIS in the caliphate capital, Raqqa, Syria. I was on a roof of a building, and I was with some of our most elite special operators. And the Syrian Democratic Force, our partner force, was just moving in contact and destroying ISIS left and right. But every time there was a lull in the battle, Kate, ISIS being the resilient enemy they were, all of a sudden a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device that kind of looked like a Mad Max vehicle would come out and detonate, and would cause casualties on our Syrian Democratic Force partners, the Kurds that we were supporting. Or there would be a suicide vest bomber coming out, and the vast majority of those were women, and they would, conduct these attacks. So they're a very resilient enemy. And so finally, I'm standing on the roof of this house, and I just said, you know what? These terrorists have two options. They can surrender or die. And the senior enlisted leader that I was on the roof with, a good friend of mine by the name of Rob, I'll use, he said, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, we're a peace-loving nation. And should they choose to surrender, we'll treat them humanely, safeguard them to their detainee holding facility cell, and provide them, chow, a place to sleep, but more importantly, due process in a court of law. I said, but should they choose not to surrender, then we're going to kill them with extreme prejudice, whether that is dropping bombs on them from the greatest Air Force in the world, shooting them in the face from the greatest Army and Marine Corps in the world, or beating them to death with our entrenching tools, our military shovels. But in the end, it's ISIS's choice whether they choose to live or die. And in the end, we will, give them the opportunity to do each. And so when I said that, Rob told me, well, why don't you send that message in your update to General Dunford and Secretary Mattis? So I did. And Secretary Mattis wrote back to me and said, keep saying that. That fits into the narrative of annihilating any threat to the United States. And so I said it for like 6 months everywhere. And it was never an issue until one day I was in Afghanistan on Christmas Day, 2017, I believe. And I was on stage. This was during a USO tour to fire up the troops. And we had a lot of celebrities and actors and everything with us. And General Dunford and I always started off before the celebrities took over. And so I said my message, that what I just described. And it fired up the troops. I mean, they were ready to leave that hangar in Bagram Air Base and get out and get after the enemy. Well, as I was walking off the stage, a civilian man approached me and identified himself as a reporter of a very influential newspaper back in Washington, D.C. And he said to me, I can't believe that you just called for the troops to go out and commit war crimes. And I said, absolutely to the contrary, sir. I said, we train soldiers, Marines, and battlefield airmen how to use non-standard weapons to neutralize enemy threats. And he said, well, I'm going to go public with this because this is completely against the law of armed conflict. And I said, well, go for it then, but then afterwards, I thought about it for a second. I thought, oh man, this could go sideways for me in a hurry. So I reached out to my public affairs advisor, now retired Master Sergeant Rob Couture, who normally my whole time as a SEAC traveled all over the world with me. And I said, hey, here's what this guy's talking about. Here's what he's going to do. And he said, well, let's beat him to the punch. And so he took my quote with a photo of me holding a military shovel and entrenching tool, and he posted that quote on all forms of social media, Twitter at the time, Facebook, Instagram, you name it. And we posted it as a means of, one, showcasing that we were going to still inspire the troops, but two, to take energy away from this reporter's story that they were going to do. Well, it went viral. All of a sudden, this message just went all over what I had done, to the point that French media, German media, Japanese media all picked it up. And the Fox 5 did a story on it. CNN, the New York Times, ABC all did coverage on it. And as a matter of fact, it was such a contentious post that ISIS started talking smack about me on their French propaganda page. So we in turn started talking smack back to them, me and my public affairs guy. But in the end, what it did is it exactly what I wanted it to do, Kate. It inspired the troops. It fired them up. I got letters, cards, messages, texts from all over the world, from troops, from the U.S. and our partners and allies, and said, thank you. This is a message we needed to hear, and you have just energized us to go out and get after the mission. And the other thing, and you'll never hear about this in the press, but I got a note from someone that was on the president's staff at the time who had used to be over in the Pentagon with us. And he said, everybody over here loves it. The president, the vice president, everybody in the administration. Finally, somebody is saying something that makes sense out there. And so all of a sudden, one day, one sailor who was a guy on our staff, he approached me and he had a shovel. He had an entrenching tool. He said, "Would you sign this?" And I said, "Absolutely." So I signed it. He posted it on social media. And all of a sudden, Kate, I was getting hundreds of these things sent to me to sign. And in the end, here 5 years later, I've signed almost 6,000 of these shovels. But the bottom line, so what I did is I turned this into something that could help service members. So I created the eTool Nation as a means of those warriors who have served in combat and their families and veterans, that they have a place that they can have conversations. So I have an eTool Nation page. But more importantly, the eTool Nation now is the page that my wife Sandra and I use to give back. You know, we're constantly donating money to great organizations, you know, a Soldier's Child Foundation that supports Gold Star children, the Lighthouse for the Blind. You know, the Lighthouse for the Blind, people don't know that those entrenching tools, those shovels, are designed and made by 19 blind people in Spokane, Washington. So I've tried to turn this around into something that is good and can give back to people. And the other thing I do with it, Kate, is I support veterans on their journey. I sponsor through the eTool Nation and PME Hard 4 veteran athletes who serve their country or are serving their country. 2 of them are still in uniform, who are martial artists, who are bodybuilders, who are power lifters. And one of them is a female who is a world champion power lifter. But I use it as a means of assisting them with sponsorship that helps them reach their athletic goals post-military life. Wow. So that was the story of it.
Boy, you are inspiring. We are out of time. The takeaway here is the American dream is alive and well. There's no question. You can set goals and you can learn so much through John's book, Surrender or Die, Reflection of a Combat Leader. Get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you, Kate. I really appreciate you allowing me to come on today. And thank you for continuing to be an inspiration for so many in all of the works you do in assisting speakers and folks like me.